All right, welcome everyone. I'd like to open this session with a land acknowledgement. It's always an honor and a privilege to be able to be asked to acknowledge the land. Today finds me situated on the traditional territory of Treaty 6, Métis Nation Zone Number 4 in Edmonton, Alberta. When we do a land acknowledgement, it comes from our hearts and spirits, not only to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples whose footsteps and hearts have belonged on this land for many generations, but also to land spirit itself. And I'd like to acknowledge that land spirit has nourished us and protected us, and we pay honor and respect to her in many ways. And especially a thanks to the Indigenous people, the First Nations, Métis and Inuit, who've acted as stewards towards the relationship with land spirit for many years. So from my heart and spirit to yours, it's an honor to open this session today. My name is Jessica Vandenberg, and I'm the Assistant Dean of Engineering, Community and Culture at the Faculty of Engineering. I'm from the Denitaw First Nation, but I'm a 60 Scoop survivor. And it's an honor to be here as both an alumni as well as a faculty member. I'd like to welcome our guests who are joining us online today for this virtual lecture, as well as our in-person guests. So Dr. Charles Hantho, his wife, Dr. Eileen Mercier, and of course, Dean Simon Aboritz. And I'd like to acknowledge and thank Chuck especially for the support of our engineering community and the Hantho Lecture over the many years, noting that he is, of course, joined by his wife, Dr. Eileen, today. So a little bit about the Hantho Lecture itself. It's a series that was inspired by alumnus, Charles Hantho, who was awarded the Order of Canada for Leadership in environmental sustainable practice in chemical manufacturing. Together, we see our own values of responsibility, sustainable practices, and leadership in business, environment, and energy reflected in our community's priorities. The goal of these lectures is to strengthen and perpetuate these values by showcasing well-known leaders who have made a major impact through responsible leadership and sustainable practices. So it is a privilege and an honor to be able to welcome our guest speaker today, Nancy Southern. Nancy Southern is the Chief and Chair Executive Officer of ATCO Limited, as well as the Chair and Chief Executive Officer of Canadian Utilities Limited, an ATCO company. Nancy joined the ATCO Board of Directors in 1989 and was elected chair in 2012. She was named President and Chief Executive Officer of ATCO in 2003. She serves on boards of all ATCO subsidiary companies and also serves as Executive Vice President of Spruce Meadows, as a founding director of Akita Drilling and a director of Sengraph Enterprises Limited, an honorary director of the BMO Financial Group, and serves on the Rideau Hall Foundation Board of Directors. In addition to her business leadership, Ms. Southern has long played a leading role in advocating on social issues of global importance. Most notable, the rights of Indigenous peoples and the role of women in business. She's an honorary chief of the Kainai Blood Tribe of Alberta and was given the name Aksisa Toa Pakani. And my apologies if I stumbled on that pronunciation, or Brave Woman in 2012. Over the course of her career, Ms. Southern has served with some of the world's most prestigious and influential organizations, and today we are honored to have her join us as our speaker for the 2012 Hantho Lecture. Following the lecture, we'll answer some of the questions that have been previously submitted online, and it's my pleasure to offer the podium now to Ms. Nancy Southern.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It's what a lovely introduction, and I really admire you trying to tackle my name. I have a difficult time with my own name, Nancy, let alone my chieftainship name, which is actually the greatest honor I've ever received. Akikstowapaki. It is such a sincere honor to address so many of Alberta's future, present, and past leaders. Both my mom and dad, as well as many members of our ATCO family, are University of Alberta alumni. And so the university here holds a very special place in my heart. And the expertise, the skills, and the insights that we have seen come out of this school are really remarkable. And in fact, while it may not be for me to say, the international acclaim that the engineering faculty of the University of Alberta has built extraordinary leadership, but extraordinary successes around the world. And certainly Dr. Hantho is one example of that. I would have preferred to be in person with all of you, but as we've all learned in the era of COVID, when you can't change the direction of the wind, you must be prepared to adjust your sails. And so here we are, but I'm really honored to be here, whatever the format. Before I would begin, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are on, wherever you may be joining us from, and to pay my respect and appreciation to elders past and present. You know, the Treaty 6 lands that we're on here at the university as the traditional meeting ground and gathering place and traveling route of the Cree, the Saulteaux, the Blackfoot, the Dene Nation, Nakota, Sioux, Métis, and Inuit peoples. And so indeed, this is a very special place. And in fact, it is indicative of a place that convenes very special people, as evidenced by all of you participating in your secondary education and those of you that have achieved such remarkable and stellar careers. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Dr. Simon Aburisk, Jessica Vandenberg, and the University of Alberta Faculty of Engineering for hosting this terrific event under such stubbornly unusual circumstances. Thank you also to Dr. Charles Hantho. Chuck, you are a visionary leader, and your generous support of this lecture series provides Alberta with the opportunity to raise the bar in terms of forums and discussions of a very broad nature that are multi-partisan by nature, and in fact, strive to address sustainability for our global challenges. And it is a great pleasure to have Dr. Eileen Mercier with us as well. Thank you so much, both of you, because I know you wouldn't just do this on your own, but together. What a great partnership. And I'm so proud to be a part of this lecture series. Thank you. You know, Canada's engineers, and I've been saying this already, have always punched way above their weight and have played an incredible supporting role in our national interests, our security, and of course, our economic strength. And that has become even more apparent as we have managed our way through the pandemic, whether it's by maintaining the integrity of global supply chains, including those needed for vaccines and therapeutics, or making advancements in diagnostic testing, medical technologies, and so much more. You, our engineers of today and the future, will play an equally central role in rebuilding and reinventing Canada's economy in the future. From the physical infrastructure we rely on, to the digital infrastructure that connects us, and the health and agricultural systems that sustain us. You transform society's collective imagination into real-world innovation, unlocking productivity and growth. And in so doing, you are redefining the art of the possible, not only for our province, but for our country and indeed the world. You know, my dad always used to say, a dream is never just a dream. It is the desire to change the world around you. And achieving the dream requires a collective desire to understand what needs to be changed and what needs to be done, and the courage to implement. Bringing a diverse constituent from all walks of life to achieve a dream is real leadership. And today, I'd like to speak a little bit about the lessons that I have learned in business and life, to share some of my thoughts on leadership, and in particular, how the role of engineers can evolve to deliver smarter, more sustainable networks, systems, infrastructure, and indeed help us all achieve our dreams for a better world. The first point I'd like to just touch on, and I want to be quite quick because I'd love to get to your questions and have a good dialogue. But the first thing I would like to say, and I mentioned this to Dr. Simon and Val when we had our first meeting, was the importance of financial accountability for engineers and literacy amongst financial literacy amongst frontline engineers. Now, many young professionals struggle with this. It's not the line of skill set that you've necessarily learned in school, but I encourage you to find a way to make yourself financially literate. Financial acumen is extremely important for all engineers and actually all individuals in life, regardless of whether your job includes management or not. It is nearly impossible for an engineer to perform without considering the financial impact of every action on the organization's bottom line. So if you're out in the field doing a routine project, construction, engineering of a different line pole, or putting a pipe in the ground, or building a shelter or a place for business, your basic understanding of accounting is vital. It helps measure the impact of your work in terms of revenue and enables you to control the costs. And that is really important. It's something that gets learned, and project management is part of engineering, but the financial understanding, the timely accountability of how your project is going and how you're operating is absolutely crucial. Doesn't matter whether you're in government, in business, in academia, or in the constabulary. Financial literacy is also vital to understand the criteria that's used when companies make investment decisions. Now, you may have the best project and idea in the world, but it's going to be weighed in a competition for capital for other things that will make a difference to the organization that may not be as good as yours, but perhaps have greater economic efficiency and return. And that will give you the context to be able to work with a corporation's strategy or a government strategy. Greater financial literacy also empowers you to deal with unpredicted macroeconomic shocks, like commodity price collapse, COVID. And this financial acumen will help you stay relevant and current in these economic shocks. Now, the second piece that I'd like to focus on that I believe is really important for leadership in engineering is to build strong community relations. Relationships that solve society's grand challenges. The only way that we are going to figure out the path to decarbonization, sustainability in feeding nearly 10 billion people in the world requires extraordinary cooperation between us as individuals, business, government, and the community at large. Your success will depend not only on operational and technical ingenuity, but also upon building respectful and meaningful relationships. And these principles are fundamentally and inextricably linked. The communities we serve are also the communities where we live and work. And many of ATCO's engineers in training go into rural communities across the province or throughout Australia, and now even into Puerto Rico. My encouragement is that they have to find ways to engage in the community, to build credibility and trust for themselves and for our organization, long before a shovel enters the ground. And I can give you some examples of that. In fact, I'll start off with something that I'm extraordinarily proud of, the Alberta Power Line built here in Alberta. It was a competitively bid transmission line, a $1.6 billion project. Prior to the bid, we knew that the province was going to ask for this transmission line, whether it was going to be competitively built or within the regulated system was up to anyone. But I and the people of ATCO believed that we actually need to construct a north-south corridor for transportation, for utilities, for communication. And this leg could be the first of a model for the world in how to bring Indigenous communities together, government and corporations. And so myself and our team started discussions from Inuvik all the way to Sweetgrass with many communities, multitude of communities, as you would know, over 300 communities. And the discussion was, we can all participate in this. We can find a way to actually create a model for the world to show how we can create these corridors of economic interest and obviously for economic development in remote areas. About 6 years of discussion went on. And we used, actually, Jessica, you'll find this interesting, we used a model from the Dene in Northwest Territories, where all of the Dene communities are pulled together in the Dene Development Corporation. And they have found a way to bring great prosperity for themselves. So we used that model. Finally, the day came and the transmission line was to be awarded, and we actually won the competition. It was competitively built. It took 2.5 years to build. As I mentioned, $1.6 billion. What I promised the communities is that they would have the opportunity to buy the line, but I didn't feel that they should take the construction risk. We were far more prepared to take the construction risk. That line ran from Edmonton to Fort McMurray. We engaged with the communities all throughout the process. And even though our business arrangement was locked in, we never forgot our duty to consult. And in fact, we learned so much from the traditional people of the lands. We learned that the traditional right-of-way for a transmission line, actually the wolves figure it out and they trap the caribou and various herds as they're doing their migratory passes. And so the elders and the knowledge keepers of the communities actually showed us how to build the transmission line in a different way to protect the caribou crossing. We finished the project on budget and 3 months early, and not one intervention. Everybody was on board. And in fact, everybody had the ability to participate as true equity partnerships at the end of the day. And I believe it's one of the most successful projects, not just in Canada, but in the world, and demonstrates how we can work together. It is considered a P3, public-private partnership, because there is the contract with the government for how the line is used. And together, Indigenous communities and ATCO have a model for the world. So I encourage you to continue to really work on those relationships. In fact, if you know, you may not consider the people in the community a customer, but they are our customers. They're your customers. If you're going to build something or construct something that is new to the community, you must have a sense of the purpose for the construction project. There has to be, and you're not going to get everybody to agree. There will not be consensus on everything. But if people understand, and you take the time to understand their reasons for not wanting a project and explain your reasons for the project, you'll at least have some common ground for discussion. Technical decisions are social decisions, and community impacts and interests are part of, not separate to, engineering design and delivery. Now, so much of what you learn in school applies in a, if I may say, with no disrespect, a utopic world where formulas work exactly as expected and the needs of all stakeholders are in perfect alignment. But you will find extraordinary circumstances out in the world. And oftentimes, even though we work very hard to preemptively think about the what ifs and what the mitigation strategies are for the what ifs, something new always comes up. Creative solutions to complex social, economic, and environmental problems are vital. Engineers have a complete understanding is really critical. When I think about the troubles and the strife of a ideology around pipelines in Canada and throughout North America today, I wonder if you look back and we went through lessons learned, as good engineers would, I wonder what we would say about how to fix that problem. Would we have built 3 layers of pipe around the pipe to protect it? Would we have put in new technology? Would we have done greater scenario planning and risk planning? Would we have understood communities' concerns better? I believe the answer is yes to all of those. And I think that we can find solutions. I believe we can find solutions. And I also believe it's really up to you, the frontline engineers, to make that connection, to understand the relationships so that we can continue to move forward, progress sustainably, and continue to bring great prosperity to this wonderful country we are in. So the third point that I'd like to just raise is to talk a little bit about energy transition. Now, energy has underwritten the story of Alberta, and I believe it will continue to do so for many, many decades to come. As global demand for low carbon technologies increases, so does the opportunity in Alberta. In fact, we are in an area that is known throughout the world for its entrepreneurial spirit and its great imagination of the people of this province, and indeed this country. We have the ability to solve the problems of the world. And make no doubt, we cannot be ashamed or afraid of standing up for what we have done already. What we have done in the resource extraction industry here in Alberta is world leading. We have the greatest regulatory compact around how we develop our assets, and it is continually progressing. And it is indeed, while highly intensive in carbon, it is the most regulated and strict environment that any extraction company in the world has to work in. And as a result, at times, we have seen our investors leave the province as a result of the very difficult regulatory compact and restrictions on environmental sustainability. They have left. Well, let them leave. Let them leave. And if our country wants to promote non-democracies and poorer practices and bring in oil and gas as we try to decarbonize, let them. I think it's time to stop the ranting, stop how we feel that this is an injustice, and let's put our heads down and get to work, find the solutions. We need to transition. We need to do better. When I think of my grandfather, who was a wildcatter working on the original wooden derricks back in the Turner Valley and Ledoux Gauge, and the health and safety hazards those wildcatters had on those drilling rigs. When I think of the ecological damage that we did in the drilling industry. And that is one long lifetime ago. That's not that long ago. To where we are today in terms of health and safety, environmental protection, the requirements for ecological stewardship, we have moved mountains. And we should not be ashamed of it. And we can continue to move mountains, not literally. We have a multiple of opportunities from hydrogen, carbon capture, renewables, energy storage, efficiency advancement, electrolysis, more efficient generators and turbines. When the incremental movement of the efficiency in our machines right now is pretty darn slow. But I think, if we think of the Concorde and the Dreamliner, there can be major improvements done if we think about how to make those machines even more efficient and reduce our carbon at the same time. Well, achieving such a future is far from certain. There needs to be, as I've mentioned, greater collaboration amongst a diverse field of expertise and with great respect to communities and, in fact, a hunger and thirst for research. That hunger and thirst for research and development doesn't mean that you have to invent the lunar landing arm for Apollo. It means that we use applied research and we come up with not just incremental improvements to how we work and do business, but we find step by step a magnitude of heroic proportions to improve how we operate in our environment. And I believe you've got the energy, you've got the commitment, you've got the power of a global community that desires to see us succeed because we are the answer. So as the pace of decarbonization grows in complexity and geographical scope, the ability to collaborate and work effectively in multidisciplinary terms and teams across different organizations is going to be invaluable. And it's the only way we will achieve success for our long term. Each and every generation faces unique challenges, and I must say yours are particularly complex. Our great nation is bitterly divided along partisan and regional lines. Heated rhetoric during the waning days of the federal election served only to inflame tensions within Canada's federation. There's little consensus to the best path forward for our economy, our health system, our vital natural resource sector. And I must say, in my travels around the world, which I've been very fortunate to have, political leaders would give their eye teeth to have the resources of Alberta today in other regions of the world. Against such an uncertain backdrop as we face today, your ability to face the unknown with great courage, your resilience, and your confidence to succeed are among the greatest virtues that you can possibly possess. And you are instrumental in building Canada's future, a future of ingenuity, inclusive prosperity for all Canadians, from coast to coast to coast. You, our engineers, with your boundless imagination and ingenuity, will be the ones to meet and overcome the challenges that Canada faces. I've often used a phrase throughout my career, and it comes from Shakespeare. It says, "You are rapidly becoming what you are going to be." And if you think about that, as I do, each and every day, and you look at the choices that you have each and every day, who is it that you want to become? I know collectively Our desire is to change the world. Our dream is to bring a better world. And we're rapidly on that journey. You know, if you think about that today, you will influence who you become in the future and how things turn out in the future. And if your heart and mind is striving for excellence, you will naturally do more than anyone ever expects. You will always strive for and maintain the highest of standards. You will pay attention to the smallest of details. Most importantly, you will truly care about the people and the world around you. And excellence is what I wish for each of you. You are Canada's future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your words of wisdom and sharing your story and the journey that you shared with us today. We're going to take some time here and answer a few of the questions that have come in previously. And so I'm just going to structure it a bit, going from questions about you individually and advice that you could give to future leaders, to the questions around the company and then the larger economy.
Terrific. Thanks, Jessica.
Right, perfect. So the first question, I know the medicine wheel teaches us how to live in balance, and how to show up authentically. And I see that those traits in you, that you are working to show up authentically in the many different worlds that you sit in, with the many different hats you sit on, at the many different boards and councils you sit on, as well as a leader in your company. But when you show up authentically, sometimes it's hard to disassociate pieces of yourself as well. So how do you disassociate yourself from your own short and long-term self-interest when thinking about the options for energy transition based on Alberta's current strengths?
Well, it's true. I have a fiduciary responsibility as the chair and CEO in our organization. But I also have a very long-held and firm belief that if we do the right things for Canada and the world, our company is going to be successful, and by doing the right things for Canada and the world. And so when I am asked for my thoughts or views, I'm always humbled. And I always try, and a lot of times government officials or others may not believe, but for me, it's about Canada and it's about Alberta. And so the discussions I have, for me, you can't just put on like a coat or be a used salesman. You have to actually believe and live in what you speak. And so for me, I don't find it a disassociation. I know that if Canada's prosperous, our company will be prosperous. If Alberta is happy and prosperous, we will be happy and prosperous. So I don't find it difficult. It is, and I would say that to everyone. Don't compromise your beliefs. It's important to learn. I make mistakes, everybody makes mistakes. And it's important to learn from your mistakes. You're taught that in engineering. Be self-reflective and learn from the mistakes, but be true to yourself.
Thank you for that. That's excellent advice. And I know for myself, I always look for places of employment that align with my own personal values. And I think we see a lot of companies shifting so that their company values also are reflective of their people. So that is so crucial to moving forward. I myself am also a female identifying gender, and I've carved my own path to my own position of leadership as well. And so I have some empathy towards you for some of the difficult days and the frustrating days and the days where you're ready to hang up your hat. And so to those of minority genders in the audience, they're curious about what advice you could give about a gender minority moving into a leadership position. What are some of the supports that you've built around yourself to get yourself to where you are?
I think the biggest thing is to make sure you've got true close friends, a good close network that you can cry on a shoulder every once in a while, and that'll encourage you to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and start over again when you have those bad days. My grandfather would always say, you have one day to lie down and cry, and you have one day to celebrate your wins, and one day to lie down and cry over your failures or your problems. And then you figure out how to move forward and put one foot forward again. I think the biggest thing, and it took me a very long time to learn what actual passive aggression meant. Because oftentimes I would find myself talking very passionately about something that needed to get done, and there's a lot of heads nodding in the room, only to find out a couple weeks later, nobody did what I was hoping that they were going to do. And I guess the lesson there is identify it faster than me, because I let it go a long time. But you also have to be patient, and you do have to build credibility. And you're always going to find in life that there's a group of people you're never going to appeal to. And I think the biggest thing is just to demonstrate real leadership. You need to demonstrate perseverance and courage, determination. You cannot second or shirk your responsibilities to somebody else. You have to actually demonstrate that you're prepared to do the hard work. Roll up your sleeves. My mom, at 85 years of age at Spruce Meadows, would still drive to Spruce Meadows. She's 90 now, so we don't make her do this, but she did it all herself anyway. Nobody made her do it. She would pick up the donuts for the volunteers in the morning. She would change the toilet paper in the bathrooms at Spruce Meadows, and she would never ask anyone to do something she wasn't afraid to do herself. And I think that's for any gender or racial minority, that's the way you have to go about life. And in fact, I actually think that we've started to, if we look at the global perspective, who are the minority? Who's the minority today? And so I think we're going to have a whole different structural shift in what minority really means. And so I just encourage everyone to stay patient, determined, persevere, and keep doing the hard work.
There's a lot in what you share that really resonates with me. Finding those support groups, finding ways to build courage, really learning that work ethic, but also having some time to relieve your stress. There's an interesting question that came in around stress itself. So on a level from 1 to 10, what is your daily stress level at? And how do you manage, especially on some of these days where there's global pandemic and other things that we need to address?
I've thought about this, Jessica. And how I manage stress is I don't watch the news or read the newspaper. I get my knickers in a knot, and I get in a tizzy over policy decisions and the situation globally, just like everybody else. But we all have to recognize, like in the Desiderata, the things that we can't change. We have to forget about them and just keep doing our job to make our dreams come true each and every day. And I have a wonderful, wonderful family that supports me, and the most incredible group of individuals that work throughout our companies. And that relieves my stress. It's we have a real cooperation and ability to tell each other problems, and I think that's key. Transparency and honesty in our relationships is the key to reducing stress. You only get stressed when you've got fear. And if you have a problem that you're not dealing with and trying to avoid, then you're going to build your stress up. And we have lots of problems, but we have everybody working towards the right solution.
It's good to hear you're not too stressed on a daily basis. And I agree with you that many times I just take a break from social media and news, and you need to come back and center yourself in your home. You spoke a lot about the supports of the people that surround you, the people who work for your companies and your community. And so when you think about your company and how it's structured, we're always thinking ahead. And so how are you developing your people in order to ensure that you have the leadership that you need for the next 5 years?
That is a really good question, and it's a really hard question to answer. I think just like human life cycles, companies go through life cycles. And I'm sure Dr. Hantho has experienced this along with Dr. Mercier. When I think about our company, and so I'll just refer to ours because I know it well, it was a group of young old pros. There were no limits. The sky was the limit. There was nothing that they couldn't do. And it was a very different time back then. And so oftentimes they were selling from an empty wagon, and they would get the order and then decide how to fulfill the order. That group of young old pros stayed with the company for the better part of 30 or 40 years. And then we did something in our company that was my dad's vision, to remove the cyclicality of our founding business of building industrial workforce housing, and had a drilling company. So we acquired Canadian Utilities. We repatriated it from the United States. That brought in a whole different group of people to our organization. And it also brought a lot of economic hardship, because as soon as we did the transaction, the National Energy Program was introduced in Canada. There was a global recession, and our interest rates went to 22%. The cash flow that we were using to buy this very large company dried up immediately. All the drilling rigs were laid down, or they were going across the border, and we hadn't locked in the interest rate on the debt. And it was a very, very difficult time. And so my dad never wanted to break a promise. And so we sold a number of very, very valuable assets in order to never miss a payment. And we never missed a payment with the banks. But that changed the DNA of the company significantly back in the 80s. And so we had these incredible young entrepreneurs that had now matured and recognized, holy cow, there are risks that can hit you. Like, you can bet the farm and the farm's going to be gone. And then these very steady, solid group of engineers that know how to actually make things operate and keep things running. It was a bit of a clash. And there was a lot of some people wanting to leave, some people having to leave, to try and find a culture that was going to allow both companies to merge and adapt. And then, we went along. That took about 20 years. And then actually in the 2000s, we started to experience this incredible boom here in Alberta. And all of a sudden, infrastructure was just growing like mad. And within about 10 years, from 2005 to 2014, we more than doubled the size of the company. But that was all by greenfields, so organic growth, different than inorganic growth and acquisition. But all of a sudden, we found that we had a culture again that wasn't conducive to an entrepreneurial spirit or innovation or recognizing what the trends of the future were going to bring. We became order takers. There was so much business coming in. We added all kinds of people just because there was so much work to do. And we never actually streamlined our processes and efficiencies. But the worst was that we became order takers. We just knew the next order was going to come in. We sat at our desk and waited for the phone to ring. So in 2015, it became very apparent as we looked out. And I have to say, it was the most frightening time of my career as I looked out and I didn't see anything coming. All of the big transmission work, all of the big pipeline work, all of our industrial workforce housing work, everything was done. Commodity prices started to fall off again. A new tone on environment came into being. And I was really, really worried. So I decided that we needed to get together, and we went through some very, very challenging, difficult meetings. I brought in a facilitator, and we started talking about imagination of all things. Imagination. So let's imagine what we can do. Let's imagine, what if we don't do it? What's going to happen to us? And I was absolutely determined that we were not going to fail, that we could change again. And I have to say, standing here today, I feel like we're back in the 60s and 70s when my dad first started ATCO, and my grandfather. We have a young team full of energy and enthusiasm. And yeah, there'll be some mistakes made along the way, but the imagination and the desire to actually change the world around us is palpable everywhere you go in our company today. And so I think, it really depends on the circumstances, and leadership is truly situational. Leadership isn't just something that I have a title and I'm a leader now. It really depends on the people and understanding the situation, and in the situation you're in, you have to make the best decision you can. And that's how everybody's come together. So I feel really confident about the next 10 years. I feel very confident that we've got great young leaders for the next 10 years. I'm also very confident that in 10 years' time, we'll have to relook and refresh and reimagine what our leadership team looks like.
Thank you for that. Definitely, there's a lot of nuggets throughout your entire talk and the answers to your questions around some of the traits that future leaders should have. And we've had a couple questions come in around the skill set, the ability, the capability that is looked for in engineering future leaders. And especially here at the faculty, we're very interested in ensuring that not only are they trained technically, but they also grow those leadership skills, those communication skills, engagement skills. You mentioned imagination, having exposure to that. You mentioned earlier as well, the confidence to succeed. Can you talk a little bit more about what additional skill sets or traits that a future leader would need?
Well, Jessica, I tried to touch on that. I really do believe financial acumen is important. And I believe the great leaders of the world understand and touch the people around them. You can't just sit in an ivory tower and expect that you can lead. It goes back to my example of my mom. You have to understand your customers better than they understand themselves. And you have to put yourself in their shoes and in the community's shoes and say, okay, what are the big issues? How can I help? If I'm going to get this project done and there's some resistance, what can I do that will actually help the issues that they're facing, which probably have nothing to do with the project? And so I think that's the key, is never think that anybody is too small or unimportant to talk to. Everybody has a point of view and everybody can influence the world. And that's critical for all of us out in the field and trying to build a better Canada. Critical to understand.
For sure. And that is a common piece of advice that when students ask me for advice, I always say, you can lead from any position. You don't necessarily need explicit authority, but you can lead and you can influence change from wherever you're at. And so you've talked a lot about this strong community relations and the need to have a real connection to kinship and relationship with the people that are impacted by your decisions. And so a lot of companies, including your own, have a strong environmental, social, and governance plan. And so when it comes to measuring that, it's always a balance between that and profitability. And so can you talk a little bit about that friction that comes from those two?
Yeah, in fact, I'd love to talk to Dr. Mercier more about that. um, who's led, the largest investment organization in the country, Ontario Teachers. And I think there will come a time, there has to be balance, and there's always a pendulum swing in society. And I weighing profit only over social governance and environmental concerns it won't win the day. And weighing just environment and ignoring social and governance concerns will not win the day, and ignoring the economics. And I find today, and it's something that I'm actually actively talking to investment funds and the bankers and our shareholders about, is that energy transition is a transition. And there does have to be a balance between economics in order to keep people employed and to progress, and what you can do socially, and governance. I find the ESG title in many regards superficial at the moment. And there's a lot of cottage industry individuals that have actually popped up and said that they're doing the analysis, just like a credit rating agency, on ESG. Well, one of the boxes that you have to tick in order to get high marks in ESG today is to be able to demonstrate that your corporation has a child labor policy. Well, who in North America requires a child labor policy? And so you don't get the box checked. So I find it's very much in its infancy. In order, you can tell I get kind of passionate about this one. It's in its infancy in describing the accuracy of what companies are doing. And I believe, for the most part, most companies are trying to do the right thing. Governance comes from not just a board of directors. Obviously, a board of directors sets the tone and the strategy, and their chief responsibility is making sure you have a CEO that makes sure you have an organization that operates with good governance. But it has to be from the ground. It has to be your health and safety team has to have good governance. Your environmental team, your Indigenous relations team, your government relations team, your engineering group, and your land people. They need to have good governance. They can't go out and do things that are wrong. And so I think we have a long ways to go to evaluate ESG. It's very easy to weight 90% of ESG on environment. And that's pretty easy to do because it's very qualitative. Not qualitative, it's very quantitative. And you can measure how much CO2 you put in the ground, but who's actually measuring the rest of the stuff these days? So CO2 is the big number. There's a lot of other stuff out there. And again, it's very superficial at this point in time as to how we measure ESG. If I look at the social responsibility that our company has taken, we have over 40 true Indigenous partnerships, relationships in Canada. Those deliver on average for the last 10 years, $100 million of revenue every year. And some years it's way more. Our equity partnership in Northland Utilities, which is the small utility in Northwest Territories, primarily Yellowknife, but throughout many of the Dene communities, we have had that equity partnership for 30 years. This isn't something new to us. It's the way we operate. If we go to Chile, we take on a Chilean partner. If we go to Northwest Territories, we take on an Indigenous partner. And partnerships are how, we all want the same thing. We want to bring prosperity. We want to create opportunities and careers for the next generation. And we don't want to lose and fail or close up shop. So I think this all is just, as I said, it's in its infancy. The pendulum will swing and we will find balance. But right now, I think the rubber is going to hit the road soon, especially if we have a commodity price boom again, peak. And fiduciary responsibility is now weighed against ESG responsibility. I think it's all like a crisis always is the mother of invention, right? And I believe that's when we'll find good balance again.
Yeah, and very true. A lot of these conversations are still in its infancy. There are people who have a hard time picturing how this all works together and works in concert in order to find a way forward in harmony and balance. You mentioned several times, and of course, with your honorary chief designation as well, that both yourself and ATCO have a strong relationship with Indigenous peoples and Indigenous communities. With National Truth and Reconciliation Day around the corner, can you speak a little bit to how you personally, as well as the company, answer those calls to action today?
Well, as I said, it's really part of our method of operating. And I feel very proud that started way before me. My father felt that way very much when Truth and Reconciliation wasn't even an idea at that point in time. Everyone in ATCO must go through our cultural training courses. And we encourage everyone to extend their knowledge and continue learning about the real history of Indigenous peoples in Canada. Truth and Reconciliation, we will recognize in a way that is particularly poignant when we think of residential schools. But I think I was telling you earlier, one of my very good friends, and she's also an executive in ATCO, we had dinner last night. She's actually from Inuvik, and she was taken to residential school. And in fact, our partner in Northwest Territories, the CEO of the Dene Development Corporation, his grandfather in NWT, in the Arctic, think about this. When he was 8 years old, his grandfather took him on the trap lines through the winter so that he didn't have to go to residential school. He ended up having to go later on in life, but his grandfather pretty much saved him because he had that early established upbringing. But we've had lots of laughs and a lot of tears. And as you and I talked about, it's an emotional roller coaster. And I'm very, very sensitive to, this is not, it's a national holiday. It's not a party day. It's not a day off. It is our time to actually pay respect and think about what can we do different. Again, that problem solving, retrospective self-actualization of how do we change what was done in the past to make things better in the future.
So thank you everyone for joining in. That's our time for today. I'd like to thank our guests who have joined us here in person, and a big thank you to you, Nancy, for your words today. Do you have any final thoughts or words that you'd like to share before we end the session today?
Oh, thanks, Jessica. It's just been a great delight. I hope I haven't bored you too much. I know I probably need that shepherd hook to take me off the stage, but I really appreciate Dr. Simon Aburisk, Dr. Hantho, and Dr. Mercier, Val, Ian, Jessica, especially you for having me here today, and to all of you who would take so much time to participate today and for your great questions. I know that Jessica has a bunch of questions, And I'm happy to follow up with some notes that you could pass along, Val, if you want, on the rest of the questions. But thank you very much. And can I please say to you how much I admire your courage, your strength, and your leadership and what you are doing in a very non-diverse world, but it is changing thanks to people like you, Jessica.
Thank you so much, and it's an honor as always. That concludes our session today. I hope this finds you safe and healthy. And from my heart and spirit to yours, thank you again for joining in.